Right, welcome everybody. Good to see you all here, and thank you very much for coming. It gives me real pleasure today to introduce someone who is perhaps in slight contrast to the speaker last week. So if you remember last week it was Roy Hayes, who was Night Sports editor of the Telegraph newspaper. Richard Washbrooke is a professional photographer, but Richard works as a freelance photographer. And Richard's going to talk today about what that kind of means and the kind of work that he's done in the years that he's been working as a photographer. But obviously it's a slightly interesting contrast compared with the industry sort of person last week, who was embedded and has been for 20 odd years, 25 years I think it was, within a particular kind of newspaper environment. And I think Richard is going to talk a bit later on about kind of how the industry is changing and kind of what that means for people working in the kind of media industries. So today we're getting a kind of a slightly different perspective, and it's one that's looking at obviously images, looking at photography, and obviously I'm sure you'll understand and recognise that that's a really sort of vital part of the media, the kind of circulation, the incredibly rapid circulation of images in today's environment is sort of key to the circulation of news of various kinds. And in your own kind of social lives, social worlds, no doubt revolve around the kind of the communication rapidly of images. So great pleasure to welcome Richard. He's going to talk for a bit. He's got some slides to show you, and then we can have some questions at the end. Great. So Richard.
Okay. Hello everyone. Right. I'm a professional freelance photographer, and I cover quite a few varied photographic disciplines, and we'll go into more detail what those are. I've been full-time for 9 years, so it's quite a short time really. Time does go pretty quick. A lot of my work has appeared in national and international publications around the world. I did not go to university, I'm self-taught, so again that's quite unique in my area as to where I've got to. And previous to that I spent 22 years in the chemical industry working for a Belgian manufacturer. So I wouldn't say I had a midlife crisis, I just felt I wanted a change, and I've always had an interest in photography, and a few doors opened and I've sort of immersed myself into it. So I can explain how I've coped with doing that. There's been some highs, there's also been some lows. Highlights. This is probably one of my biggest highlights, and this came round because I know a guy, he produces a magazine called Tennis Head magazine, and he was due to do the photographing of the GB team in London, but he couldn't do it, so he put my name forward. So I actually came late to this, but we very quickly got me on board, and so I covered for the GB team the Paralympics, and that was covering swimming, athletics, everything you could think of, boccia. And during this period, every gold medal athlete, their image would appear on a stamp. So this is Ellie Simmonds, and this is her first gold medal. So in the pool of photographers, there was Getty, PA, AP, AFP, so there's quite Reuters. So to actually be selected as this image certainly was very pleasing as a freelance, especially to get one over people like these big agencies. So that'll be there for life. So, and I've actually met Ellie. It was actually over in Rio, so we were talking about this, so it's really nice. The other area, I'm a keen Arsenal fan, and so Thierry Henry, I photographed the Invincibles, the old stadium, and that was just incredible. Now Thierry Henry came back, he was re-signed, and this was in the FA Cup semis, I think, or quarters. It was against Leeds. He came on and scored, and so I'm very, very proud of this picture because obviously it's the front page of the Times. I think that was the first edition. The second edition, Mark Asplund put his photo on, and he's actually from Harpenden as well. So yeah, it was good to get that image there, but it's literally down to minutes, because I think I sent that off straight away. And there's a bit of luck as to whether your image gets used, gets picked up, who's on the editing desk, you know, was the signal strong enough? Yeah, there's all sorts of issues. So I'd like to think I got in there before Mark, and then obviously what Mark wanted to put his own image up, so I got the first editions. Again, Le Mans, I mean, it's a 24-hour race, and this is quite an incredible moment, really. You think he's won, he hasn't, he's lost. After 23 hours, 59 minutes and 30 seconds, their car stopped. They'd run out of fuel. Porsche then overtook and won. So this is almost near the finishing line, and they dragged the Japanese guy over the pits, and he's in floods of tears. So he's just lost the 24-hour race. So emotions were just incredible. So that was a very magical moment, to actually be there in the right place. Bit of luck, really, but you can make your own luck. Again, I've got a great interest in motorsport photography, mainly because you can experiment with panning and use different techniques. And obviously with panning, you may be aware of it, you try and get down as low as you can and move in line with the car, so obviously get the car focused and everything else blurred. Now I spent 2014, I went around the world photographing the WEC and all the long hauls. So I was in Japan, China, Bahrain, the States and Brazil, and that came round because I was talking to someone on Facebook, John Rourke, who works, he's the main photographer for the WEC. This is 6-hour racing, and he was having problems with a photographer not being able to cope with the stresses of photographing the races and getting the images in on time. For example, it's a 6-hour race, and every hour they want, for the media, they want photographs of the first cars in the 4 different categories. So imagine the track could be 2 miles long. You've got to get out on your little motorbike. You've got probably 10 minutes to get out, 20 minutes to photograph. Then you've got to get back, process, and deliver on the desk the images. And they didn't want this one corner saying, oh, there's number 1, there's number 2, and number 3. No, you had to go around and get different angles, cars going left to right, right to left. So the pressure of getting the right images for that was immense. So this guy had basically had given up the ghost. So talking to John, and he had problems, and he said, well, yeah, if you're interested, come along. So I then spent 4 months going around the world photographing the FIA WEC. And that's all through, again, just by knowing someone. So again, if you've noticed already, it's purely networking, it's talking to people, that I'm picking up events. So it just shows what can be done. London Marathon, always love photographing this. We're lucky that we're literally 20 yards from the finish line. There's probably the main camera that you see on the TV is recording when the runners come across. And what you don't see, there's probably about 20 photographers. If you imagine the desk here, the cameraman will be here. And in this desk space, there'll be 20 photographers, maybe 6 lying flat on the ground. The rest are sitting, standing, and we're all hunched into this huddle to capture moments like this. So very privileged to be able to get into key positions. And it's great when something like this happens and you see them crossing the line, and obviously you can just see at the split moment the tapes burst. So that was a great moment. PGA Wentworth. Again, this is one event I do every year. As a freelance photographer, it's quite difficult to get in. The fact I make sure I do it every year, that means I'm on the list. I get to know the people, they let me in. I think in the early days it was probably turn up and see if we could generate some money from the images. And then I've worked for various agencies as the years have rolled on. Again, unique moment. You just happen to be in the right place at the right time. It's just one of my favourite shots. I think the ball's obviously gone into the rough and he's just given up, dropped everything. But okay, area of photography. Obviously a main area, I love sport because it's very dynamic. You see some amazing people, you see some amazing teams. But if I was to try and make a living just purely from sport photography, I'd struggle, really would. You need to be working for an agency like Getty, Reuters, and where there'll be 2 weeks, 3 weeks events at a time. For example, Olympic Games could be 4 weeks, so you're out there and you're getting paid every day. If you're freelance, you don't necessarily get paid every day, so you've got to rely on the images will go to publications to sell and to make sure you can get your money back. So it's a bit of a risk. So you tend to be with an agency on some of the bigger events. So what I've done is I've sort of, over the years, I've fallen into certain areas, and I'm a great believer you don't have all your eggs in one basket, you try and spread. The only problem with spreading is I've got 5 or 6 areas that I need to spend just as much time on all of the areas, then so I'm really juggling, and it is quite full on. Obviously, buildings. I do work for a lot of companies like Jarvis, fine fitted interiors, so it's kitchens, it's construction sites. So I get involved in buildings a lot. Weddings are quite straightforward. I think bigger the weddings, the better. And you've got some great locations around here. Brocket Hall, Luton Hoo, St Michael's Manor is a lovely event. Very close, but everything's there. Game shoots, that's pheasant shoots. Now, some of you may not be particularly happy with that. I don't shoot myself, but the actual industry is quite fascinating. So you've got the dogs picking up, you've got the people behind the scenes, but again, you tend to get a lot of CEOs, directors. So again, for networking, I mean, I've picked up a lot of building work just by talking to someone in the field. They said, "Oh, come and shoot for us for our buildings." Sport, corporate events. Again, very lucky. I was on LinkedIn and I came across a company called Red Photographic, and they do a lot of events. So HSBC Golf Days, Save the Children. Called them up. They looked at my portfolio. They asked me to come in, and by the time I got home, they'd already passed on some work. It was a golf day, and I've been with them for about 7 years. In fact, they're covering the tennis event at the O2 Arena at this moment. So they're a great company to work for. It's constantly changing. It could be drinks adverts. I tend to do more of the sport events. There's a lot of bike events, cycling events. I've just done the 6-day cycling event at the Stratford Velodrome, which is a great event. News, that's quite important. There is a lot of news going on. I tend to do bits and pieces for a Chinese news agency, Xinhua. With the time level there, that's quite interesting. I don't need to submit my images straight away. There's sort of a 6-hour delay before they wake up, basically. So I'm not having to rush so much, but a lot of my colleagues is constantly, as soon as you've taken the photo, that image is out. It needs to be hitting all the social media. But generally, those are the main areas that I concentrate in. During the year, some will be more busy than others, but I'm constantly juggling. And also trying to think ahead, especially on the sporting events. Next year, when is Wimbledon? When is the Wentworth? Are there going to be any major events, like, for example, Paralympics in Japan, 3 years' time? I've already started talking to the GB regarding what they want for photographic-wise for that. Buildings, this is quite an interesting one. This is in Harpenden, it's Glen Eagles. Again, it's quite useful networking because I happen to know the MD. Met him on a golf course. When that was finished, probably about 3 years ago, he asked me to come in and photograph. And then suddenly, because the door opened, I'm now doing quite a lot of work with them. So I saw it being built, I sent him an email just saying, if you wanted photographing, just let me know. So that was really nice. So that actually, by just keeping an eye out what's happening out there, it actually paid off. So I'm getting regular work now through them. As I said, the building, it's really interesting. So today, this morning, I was with T&B, who are based in Wheat Hampstead, and they do a lot of work for the community. So I was at Heathlands Deaf School, just photographing the kids there on a careers of ice. So it's really varied, but T&B that's great because I also photograph all their buildings and all their stuff they put together, but the community side was really nice, and it also generates more work. So the guy I met on the shoots, he is a shop fitter. Basically, he's shop fitted all the Godiva chocolates in London. So I had to go in and photograph all of those, which was really nice to do. Thomas Light Burlington Arcade. So straight away, my portfolio was really nice. And having a good portfolio meant that when I then approached another building company, they could see what I was doing. And in fact, that sort of led on to doing all the HRO in garages in London. So Ferrari, Maserati, a Lamborghini. And funny enough, one of the architects who gets involved in that, I went to school with. So there's another networking. So again, it's interesting how things move on. Weddings. I mean, I love weddings because generally people who get married are very happy. And that was a recent wedding, Asia House in London, and her facial expressions, I mean, she was like this all day. Lovely lady, and she was just so excited. So it's a pleasure to have that experience of being able to photograph when these things happen, and it's just capturing the right moment. If I caught it too early or too late, it's just a normal picture. But that just, and she was doing that all the time. So it made my life a little bit easier. As I said, I try and concentrate locally, but we'll travel. But as I said, we've got some great venues. So, but it can be full day. It's long hours. Feet gets very sore. And it probably takes me 2 days of editing. So when you look at weddings, when you do all the costings, I always cost for 4 days' work at least. So it's a day to shoot, 2 days processing, and the other day is the incidentals. It's meeting them before and meeting them after, maybe getting wedding albums, looking at the venue. And again, we'll go on to this later. Once I photograph this client is gone. So I've now then got to find another client. At least with the building industry, it's repetitive. It's, they'll come on next week and go, oh, are you around? Can you do this? Can you do that? So again, it's about the amount of time and effort you want to put into this. Game shoots, I mean, you're in the countryside. You can see some amazing sunsets. The dogs are quite incredible. It's not everyone's taste, but for me, as a bystander watching, it's an interesting, and as photographic-wise, it's quite incredible because you can get the shot coming out. Yeah, it's great. But for networking, incredible. Classic example, last year I was on a local shoot, and in fact it's one that I'll go up to every now and again. They put on free food and drink, turn up and photograph, and there was a guy in the field and he was going, contacts his colleague, are you interested in a photographer on your shoot next week? So they went, yeah, let's book him. So I got the commission, and I also sell books, and we were at Downton Abbey, Highclere, which was a great location. He then booked me for 2 more events, And this year I've got 3 more with them coming up. And what's also good, he's also part of a high-end property developer. So I've sort of, okay, we'll cover this, that's great, but my long-term goal is he's into property. He's doing high-end property. So great, again, great opportunity. So again, it's networking, it's sort of thinking ahead. Sports, again, I just, this is at the Velodrome, this is the Paralympics. Actually, this is the World Championships. So that's Bradley Wiggins, Cav there. When they won, that was incredible, really. So, and that's taken on the inside. It's a different perspective. When you're at a sporting event, you could be high up, you could be on the athletics field, you could be anywhere. So you've got to think what you've got to take, what you need to capture. For example, the classic case in Rio last year with the Paralympics was our remit was we had to get every gold medal, but we also had to get some action. So I had to work out when it was time to go on the infield and watching the timing, watching the racing, and then suddenly realise that there's going to be a gold medal ceremony. So you then have to rush out, run round, and make sure you're in place to get the medal ceremony. And I think with the 4 of us, the last day, there were 5 medal ceremonies up for grabs, 4 gold and a bronze. So we let the GB team decide which ones they wanted, so they went for the gold. And we managed to get a photo from probably Reuters of the bronze medal. But again, it's logistically, it's not a case of just going there and photographing, you've got to think out the box. How do I get there? What's the light doing? How easy is it to photograph? Have I got the right qualifications or the right media content to get in there? Because sometimes you turn up and they go, no, you're not on the list. And it's like, really? So then you've got to try and explain, no, I am, this is who I'm shooting for. And in fact, the London Marathon, I was shooting for the Chinese news agency, and initially they were saying, no, you can't go down there. Until, well, I had a little word, a nice word, always polite, and he said, no problem, we'll get you down. Because I knew him from other events, so he knew I was legit. Because this industry, you do get a lot of outsiders trying to come in, and so they're quite strict on who can go down there and who can't. Corporate events, I love shooting fireworks. That was down at Lakeside, actually. They've just opened up, not firework night, it was about 2 months ago on the quays to the waterside, and they just opened up a section of the buildings. This company I've worked since 9-10 years ago, maybe a little further along. They were the first company that I actually did some work for. And in fact, they're the ones that got me into this. So I photographed, it was a rugby league game, and they wanted me to do the firework display. So after 20 seconds, finished. So I sat down and photographed the game, and I sat next to a guy called Carl Retzini, who works for Reuters now, fantastic football photographer. Swap cards. I sold some of the images to Hull, who won. But Carl at the time was working for Camera Sport, and they were a small agency, and they liked what I'd photographed, and they said, right, do you want to come and photograph for us? So I was working during the week selling chemicals, and then Saturday, Sunday, photographing Arsenal, Chelsea, and then it just went on from there. So again, networking. But fireworks are great. That's just that's a 2-second shot. Everything's in line, and there's 3 tiers, so it's probably pretty perfect, really. I love news. This is obviously Theresa May when she got re-elected, and you can see the number of photographers involved. It's cramped. I'm actually standing on a platform, standing on a chair, hoping not to fall over. I'd hate to think how many people are there. There's overseas, there's national. Really interesting. Again, trying to make sure you can get in, you've got the right pass. But great opportunity. With regards to news, I do know, like for example, Toby, he works for Reuters. he was one of the photographers who was on the bridge at Westminster. And he was actually in Westminster, and he'd come out and he was having a cup of tea on the bridge, and he heard a thud. He turned around, and that was one of the American guys who died later on after being hit by the car. And he was thrown over the bridge, landed right next to Toby. So Toby's thinking, crikey. So he ran up, met the gentleman's wife who was injured. So he's been to war zones. So he basically picked the camera up and started snapping away. That's his job. But, you know, being in the right place at the right time, okay, but very horrific. So it is around, and myself, would I want to get involved in a war zone? Would I want to get involved in something like that? Probably not. So I think I'd leave it for the people who have dealt with, you know, photographing death and stuff. It's pretty horrific. But the day prior to this, I was doorstepping Jeremy Corbyn. So that was quite interesting. And again, there was about 20 photographers running around as he walks to the polling station. So again, it's something a bit different. I don't do a lot of news. I don't particularly like sitting around. I think I spent 6 hours on that platform waiting for something to happen. It just gets very boring. So there are very boring times. So explain a little bit about my journey. Again, I mentioned about meeting the photographer, Carl Rizzini. That sort of opened the doors, which then went to Premiership football, photographing at Wimbledon twice, Test Ashes, Champions League final, that's in Madrid, FA Cups. So very privileged to have been able to photograph. Absolutely fantastic. And I still have to pinch myself thinking, how on earth did I get to this position from no training, you know, didn't really know anyone in the industry. So the opportunity and its networking, a few doors open, and it can be shown what can happen. Read photographic via LinkedIn, very important. You know, you've got to look around, especially on the social media now. There's so much out there. And seeing what companies are doing. And if you've got a good portfolio website, then they can see what you're doing as well. So what happened was I started to do more and more sport. So to the point where it was Monday, Tuesday, Saturday, Sunday, and still doing a full-time job. So I spoke to the company and said, can I do 4 days? And they said yes, because they didn't want to leave me. Didn't want me to leave. So I did that for about, I think, a year and a half. And then they came back to me and said, what do you want to do now? And I said, well, I want to give it a go. So I did a 9-month handover and changed. So I then became a freelance photographer. And within probably 4 months, the agency I was working for turned around and said, can't afford to pay you. Ugh. So I was actually back in Prayon, thinking about, do I go back in? And by chance, they wanted a consultant for 10 months. So they said, look, you can do the job, you know everything about the company. So I did that for 10 months, working 8 days a month. And in the meantime, it meant I could get out there and look for work. And it was either going to work or not. So again, that was the lowest. I don't think you could get any lower. So what are the downsides? Well, everyone's a photographer. So news stories, you're finding a lot of people iPhones. You know, if you're there, you happen to be there in the right place at the right time. Well, actually, if something's really bad, it's not the right time. But if you start filming it, taking photos, all the agencies, all the media sites will be after you. There was one particular lady recently, I think all the major agencies were actually replying to her tweets saying, can we use this image? Can we use this image? Now, she could have got some good money for that, but because she wasn't really aware of what was happening, she said, yeah, use it, as long as I get a credit. But credits aren't going to pay the bills. And a lot of people then were writing back saying, why are you giving your images away? You know, you should be charging for them. This is what professional photographers do. So when you've got this sort of mentality of people just giving images away, this does come into the industry, and it makes life a little bit hard, because sometimes you're up against someone who's just used an iPhone. So it's getting harder and harder. You can't be everywhere. So I think it's really more on the news side, because if something event happens, the agency needs to get a photographer there pretty quick. So that Reuters, AFP, they have people walking around London just waiting. But if you happen to be passing by and you see something, you pick up your phone and go click, potentially that could earn you some money. You look at the newspaper industry, you probably discussed this and you're probably aware of this. And with the speaker you had last week, that's getting a difficult industry. I've got a 10-year-old son. I don't think he'll buy a newspaper when he's older. Job cuts, prices are falling. What you would sell an image now as opposed to 10 years ago, big differences. The Mail Online, you could probably sell an image for £20. So, that's not going to do much. So that is the problem. Technology, FTP from a camera. Just at the moment I'm working with a company called Silver Hub, and they've taken the contract of Getty of the FA. So we're at Wembley photographing the England games and behind the scenes, and the FA do a lot of stuff into the community. All the images need to be sent straight away. So there's no, obviously they're recorded onto a card, but it's not a case of coming back to the office, downloading the card, bit of processing, sending off. No, they need to go straight away, bang. So you need to make sure you've got the right equipment to handle that. Rates are falling. Again, to do a news story, maybe 160 quid. Football, I know people are probably getting paid £75 to shoot a game. But you're probably getting there 2 hours before. So it's 90 minutes for the game, and then 2 hours later. So not great money. There are even people who will photograph football for nothing because they get a pass in. And then on the Monday, they're back at work, being a dentist. And we have a big joke. It probably would be dentists because they can afford the equipment. But it is a real problem. So yeah, there's more and more people who just think this is a hobby, great, I can sit in front of my favourite team, photograph, give some images away, and if I get something in the paper, great. But that doesn't help the person who's next to that person. All they do is photography, so they've got to earn money. And I think you also come across this in journalists. Again, that's another area that you get, people just coming in writing projects for nothing, and others who are trying to sell, and again, that's really difficult. I mentioned about the weddings. Once you photographed a wedding, they've gone. Okay, you get albums, and then you may perhaps get the children, perhaps follow on later on in life, but generally weddings, you have to then find a new client, so you have to invest time and money to go and find these people. Whereas if I'm photographing a building, I just get a phone call, can you be there next week? So my outlay is a lot different. It really depends on how much you charge, how much you want to spend to get the business in. But cost of equipment, a 1DX Mark II is £5,000. So I've got a Mark II, I've got a Mark I, I've got a 400 2.8, which buying brand new is £8,000. I have a 70 to 200, which is £2,500. A wide angle, 800. So as a startup, probably £20,000. If you want to compete with Reuters, AFP, PA. Now that doesn't mean you're going to get into the positions that they're getting in. So for example, Wimbledon, you see the side where you can see all the photographers down the side. They're all newspapers, international agencies. If you're working for a smaller agency, you're over here, in amongst the camera TV crew. the view is not as good, and you're lucky if you get anything, because all the players will look towards where their mums and dads and their friends and family are, and they'll always look that way, not this way. Apart from one exception, I think it was when Andy Murray won. He actually, if you watch the game and he finishes, he doesn't run towards the players or the family. He actually turns and runs and walks towards the crowd, going like this. And there was a guy in the crowd who's not professional, had a Nikon camera, and he actually made some money on that. Right place, right time. But all the other national papers were all thinking, what's happening? He hasn't turned. Because that's the money shot. Literally when he's thrown the racket in the air and he's going like that. So that was a bit exceptional, but most of the times you will be sitting in the position where those athletes are going to celebrate. And they know that because they also get the media coverage. Mentioned about shoot days, that's led to commissions. This was a really interesting one, Braley Cars. They're in Harpenden, they sell Mazda, Kia. And I was driving past and I noticed the showroom was being converted, being revamped. So I pulled over, spoke to Paul. They were going to be opening up in a couple of weeks. So he commissioned me to photograph that. He then had the official opening, which the mayor came along, so he commissioned me for that. And then we did a couple other little projects. I photographed his daughter's wedding last year, and he's got 7 to 8 sites around Hertfordshire. So I've now got to photograph those as well. So from one little phone, stopping the car, asking a very simple question, are you interested, led to that. And then the other exciting thing is Stuart Brooks, who was actually helping Paul on the social media side in the automotive industry. He's now branched out and he's more getting involved into the building industry. And at the moment we're working with a company called JCA, and they're doing a big development in Harlow. It's a data company, KAO, where there'll be, Google will hire, and data is just getting, we need to store all this information. And they've just spoken to me a couple of days ago. They've got 20 new projects they want photographing, and I've already photographed Camden Brewery is something that JCA did as well. So yeah, it's staggering, from one little, very innocent, very simple question, do you need a photographer, has suddenly led to quite a few £1,000s worth of business. So I actually quite like the way, the idea of from something small it can spread. Social media, obviously this is something you'll be more aware. I do Instagram a lot because I'm a photographer. Visually, people want to see what I'm photographing, and I tend to do it even I'm on my way to a project. If I see something interesting, a building, I'll stop, photograph it, put it up, and then I get feedback. I get people who will join, I get to know people, I get to see what they're doing. And in this game, it's all about networking, it's all about knowing people in your industry. LinkedIn is a great one as well, especially for business. So again, it's linking up with businesses. In the building industry, you've got civil engineers, architects, contractors, builders, lighting. So there's 5 or 6 different areas that I can photograph, and it sometimes happens if I photograph a building, there could be 5 people interested in those images. They're all spin-offs, whether they're lighting, heating. So again, linking up, and then it's literally just getting onto the website and seeing, well, how many architects are there locally, and then calling them, showing them the website. Again, it generates interest. Facebook, that's more for family and friends. But on a local scale, you tend to find now, for example, Harpenden and St Albans do it. You've got, it's the Harpenden Parents Network. So you could have 5,000 people part of that network. So some of those will be lawyers, some of those will be architects, some of those will be builders. And again, you know, the way they run now, I know the Hartland one and St Albans do, they say every Wednesday you can advertise. So, you know, I'll take a screen grab of my web page, put it up. Could be weddings one week, could be buildings, and just say Richard Washbrooke, you know, www.richardwashbrooke.com. And I just keep doing it, and something I've actually got some work from it. It's not massive amounts, but the idea is to let people know where you are, because you just never know. Somebody might go, I need a photographer. And then you also I get recommendations as well. So at the moment I have 5 websites. So again, I keep things differently. If you, for example, had sport, or probably let's say shoot days and weddings together, that's not, you know, that'll offend some people. But also, people don't want to see shoots, they want to see weddings. So what I've done is I've separated it. If you want to interested in a wedding photographer, they want to see what I photographed and how I photograph weddings, they can go to that and it tells them exactly what wedding photography is all about. If they're interested in shoot days. Building, I've done the same thing for that. I have more of a general news, what I'm sort of doing currently, and that's the richardwashbrooke.com. And that could be like little projects I do. If I'm sitting on the train, I'm looking at all the graffiti as you go down the Thameslink line. There's a lot of it, and it's quite interesting. It's a bit nerdy, but it's just different, and it's letting people know you're a photographer, you're exploring different mediums, different types of photography, because you need to keep refreshing your memory and stuff, and looking at different ways of photographing, basically. So 5 websites, there's a cost, there's also time to make sure they're updated. You know, I have to Instagram every day, so that takes time. And I think that's it.
Great.
So hopefully you haven't fallen asleep, but.
I'm just sort of wondering how that compares with, say, you know, were you to get a job, be offered a job working for Reuters, you know, would you think, well, actually that would be brilliant, I'd love to do that, or are there kind of pressures there that actually, you know, by being freelance, you've got certain kind of freedoms and certain kinds of...
Freelance has given me the freedom to more on the building, because they'll phone up and say, we have a job here, can you contact the site manager? So I contact the site manager and say, right, look at the diary, and they'll say sometime this week. So I'll go, okay, I can do tomorrow. And they'll say, okay, what time? And most of the time I'll go 10:30. So I'll take my son to school, get on the train, go in, photograph the job, come back, pick him up. In an ideal world, okay, it doesn't always work like that. But I've managed to get that job on my time, and hopefully it doesn't inconvenience anyone else. You know, if I've got to go in early, which sometimes I do, you know, I have to get Grandpa on duty to take Ben in. So, or my wife, it just depends when she's working. So it's a bit of a juggling act. So with freelance, you have a decision whether you want to take that job on. So for example, with the Paralympics, that's 3 weeks of work. You have no social life. You're just, in fact, because the London Games, because I came in late, they didn't have any accommodation. So I was up at 7, straight into London, got the javelin, straight into the centre. Now, if that day I was at Brands Hatch photographing Story, I mean, she is a multi-gold medalist. I then had to get on a coach, go down to Brands Hatch, so that was all early. And you then shoot the day, you then come back, you get something to eat at 10 o'clock at night, and then you start thinking, right, time to get unprocessed, right, time to go home. Get home about, well, you missed the train, because in those days it was every hour. The javelin was running every hour. Get home at 2, get up at 7, go in. And I had a classic case was I was sitting at Wimbledon and there were 2 students behind. And I said, God, you've got a great job, sitting here, you know. I said, yeah. Got up at 7, drove in. I've now got to cover 19 tennis courts. I've got to watch if Nadal's going to go out or Federer's going to lose, because so you're constantly looking, you're getting texts saying Fed's 2 sets to love's down, is he going to go out? And you don't automatically get on the court side. You have to wait every 3 games. So you have to suddenly pick up your cameras and wait before you can go out. They're sitting down, rush off, and then you suddenly find, you get there, oh, he's just broken his back. Right, I need to get back. So juggling act, but I remember the first time I was at Wimbledon, the facilities were really bad. My desk was a shelf. I literally spent hours standing, editing, and then leaving at 10 o'clock to go home. And then you get up early, and then you go in, and then you think, why am I doing this? Because you've got access to an amazing event, whether it's Rio last year, whether it's London, Wimbledon. It is hard work, but because you're freelance, you can decide what you want to do. Do I want to be traveling around the world like the motor racing? No, not particularly. Formula One, Clive Mason of Getty, he's got 5 children. He covers Formula One for the last 20 odd years. And the racing now is 8-9 months of the year, 10 months. It's constant, because there's also the practice. It's just not the race. When I was doing the WEC, I had to be away for a week because they had the setup, they had the free practice, and then they had practice 1, practice 2, practice 3. Then they had the race. And then you get that one image, you think, Le Mans, I didn't sleep for 37 hours. But I got that image. So that was, and not many people got that. So that was great. So it's long hours, it's hard, it's antisocial sometimes, but the rewards are great. If I'm working for someone like Reuters, they'll just say, okay, we need you over there. We need you to go and do 3 weeks there. We want you to go and do 2 weeks there. Or go on doorstep, for a week. Well, the royal baby. Some of those photographers were there for 2 weeks. That's all they did. They were just stood opposite the hospital entrance. 2 weeks of just sitting there just waiting, because they couldn't afford to miss it. And then you'd have to see people out to get a cup of tea and stuff. But standing there is just ridiculous. So would I want to work for Getty or no? And you're not always guaranteed work all the time, because initially they'll give you a few odd scraps here and there, and then you've got to try and prove yourself. So it's early days, not easy.
All right. Well, that brings us, I think, up to time anyway. So just say thank you to Richard again.
Thank you.
Round of applause once more.
Thanks. Just of interest, how many people are interested in photography itself? So what, are you interested in sport or news or? Yeah. And to be interested, professional doesn't, what does professional mean? It just means is how you approach the industry, how you approach yourself. Ideally getting paid for it is fantastic. It's interesting, but those number of hands there, then how many other universities, how many other courses will people put their hands up? There must be hundreds. So what's going to make you different to everyone else? A bit of luck, always luck. But networking, you saw how everything seems to follow on, and you make your luck by talking to people.
Yeah,
so
it's around networking. Doesn't matter whether you're going, whether it's photography, whether it's writing, whatever. Actually, it's like
talk to people, find out what people are doing, and also be nice to people, because there's that old rule that 20 years time from now, you could be sitting in front of that person that you were bullying, looking for a job, and they're going to go, you want a job from me? No. So again, it's just talking and making notes. Have cards, always have cards ready to say, this is who I am. So yeah, thank you.